I gripped the revolver tighter, the metal warm against my palm from the Arizona sun beating down on the dusty trail. My horse snorted beneath me, sensing the wrongness in the air before I did. The faint, unnatural hush that blanketed the Whitmore ranch like a shroud. We'd ridden out from Tombstone at dawn, me and Elias, chasing whispers of gold in the hills, but now those tales felt like fool's bait. As we crested the rise, the homestead came into view. A squat adobe house flanked by a sagging barn, clotheslines strung with tiny dresses fluttering like ghosts in the breeze. No smoke from the chimney, no children's laughter, just that eerie quiet, broken only by the creak of a doll's porcelain head lolling from a post on the porch. Elias reined in his mount beside me, his weathered face creasing deeper. "Something ain't right here, Jake," he muttered, his voice low as if the wind might carry it to listening ears. He was the cautious one, always had been. My partner in prospecting for 3 years, ever since we struck out from Virginia after the war. Me? I was the fool who charged ahead, driven by grit and a hunger for something more than scraping dirt for nuggets, but even I felt the prickle at my neck, like eyes watching from the shadowed windows. We dismounted slow, boots crunching on the parched earth. The yard was littered with toys, ragged stuffed bears and wooden horses half buried in dust, but no sign of life. No livestock lowing, no dog barking. I scanned the horizon, the Superstition Mountains looming like jagged teeth to the east, but nothing stirred. "Maybe they up and left," I said, though my gut twisted at the lie. The place looked lived in, too much so. Fresh tracks in the dirt, small ones like a child's leading toward the house. Elias shook his head, unhitching his rifle from the saddle. "Ain't no leavin' in this heat without water. Check the well first." He nodded toward the stone-ringed pit at the yard's edge, its bucket dangling empty. Practical as ever, that was Elias, think before you leap, while I pondered the leap only after. I approached the well, peering down into the black maw. The rope was frayed, bucket splintered as if something heavy had been hauled up and dropped too many times. A faint sickly sweet smell wafted up like overripe fruit mixed with something fouler. I recoiled, spitting dust from my lips. Dry as a bone. Been that way a while. From the porch, Elias called out sharp, "Jake, get over here." His tone yanked me around, boots sliding. He stood frozen at the door, rifle half raised, staring at a doll propped against the frame. A girl's plaything, maybe 2 feet tall, with cracked china skin and glass eyes that caught the light like accusations. But it wasn't the doll that stopped me. It was the tiny handprint in the dirt beside it, smeared fresh leading inside. No child's hand, not quite. Too small, too perfect, unmarked by the rough life out here. I joined him, heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't some abandoned claim. This was a grave pretending to be a home. "We should ride on," Elias whispered. But I was already pushing the door open, the hinges screaming like a warning. Inside, the air hung thick, dust motes dancing in the shaft of light. The parlor was a shrine to the small, shelves lined with more dolls, dozens of them dressed in calico and bonnets, posed in eternal play. A rocking chair sat empty, a half-knitted blanket draped over its arm, needles still hooked in yarn. And in the corner, by the hearth cold as death, 2 figures stirred. Women, middle-aged, their faces gaunt and shadowed, turning toward us with eyes that gleamed unnaturally wide. The taller one, Mrs. Whitmore, I reckoned from the town talk, rose first. Her hands clutched a doll to her chest, rocking it gently as if it cooed in her arms. "Strangers," she said, voice soft but edged like a hidden blade. "You've come for the children?" Her sister, or kin, hard to tell, nodded from her seat, cradling her own bundle, whispering lullabies to blank painted faces. Elias shifted, rifle steady. "Ma'am, we're just passing through. Looking for water, maybe news of the trail." But I saw the flicker in her gaze, the way her fingers tightened on the doll's yarn hair. This wasn't madness born of the desert. It was something deeper, a grief that had twisted them into guardians of ghosts. And as the door swung wider behind us, admitting the full glare of the sun, I realized we'd stumbled into a story no prospector's tale could match. One where the dead didn't stay buried, and the living played pretend with porcelain lies. I gripped the rifle tighter as the dust cloud swelled on the horizon, swallowing the last sliver of afternoon sun. Elias had spotted it first from the ridge, his old eyes squinting against the glare, muttering about riders too fast for friendlies. Now with the corral gate swinging loose in the wind, I knew we were in for it. Raiders, probably, the kind that didn't ask before they took. Ma was inside the cabin, her doll clutched to her chest like it was little Tommy reborn. whispering nonsense to its porcelain face while the real threats bore down on us. "Get the horses saddled, quick!" I hissed to Elias, my voice barely cutting through the howl of the wind. He nodded, his gnarled hands fumbling with the ropes, but his face was stone. Cautious as ever, the man who'd pulled me from more scrapes than I could count since Pa died. I glanced back at the cabin, heart pounding. Ma hadn't stirred since the fever took the boys last winter. She'd sewn those dolls from their clothes, stuffed them with straw, and named them like they breathed. "Protect your brother," she'd say, setting them on the table for supper. But this wasn't fever dreams coming for us now. It was men with guns. The thunder of hooves grew louder, vibrating through the dry earth under my boots. I chambered around, the metallic click sharp in my ears. Elias led out our two mares, their eyes wild, flanks already lathered. "We ride for the canyon?" he asked, swinging up with a grunt that betrayed his 60 years. I shook my head, eyes locked on the approaching dust devils kicked up by maybe a dozen horses. No time for running. The arroyo was a death trap if they flanked us. A shot cracked the air, splintering the fence post inches from my shoulder. I dropped low, firing blind into the haze. Missed, damn it, but it bought a breath. "Ma!" I yelled, scrambling toward the door. She emerged then, doll in one arm, shotgun in the other, her face pale but eyes fierce like the woman who'd birthed 5 before the graves multiplied. "They're coming for the young ones," she said, voice steady, rocking the doll as if it could hear. Elias fired from the saddle, his bullet finding a horse that screamed and toppled, spilling its rider. We retreated step by step, the cabin our only wall. Raiders circled, whooping like coyotes, their leader, a scarred brute on a paint stallion, barking orders in Spanish-tinged English. Resource shortage, that's what they wanted. Our water barrel, the last of the herd, anything to outlast this drought that's turned Arizona to bone. One charged the porch. Ma blasted him off his mount, the recoil staggering her but not breaking her gaze from the doll. "Not my babies," she murmured, reloading with trembling fingers. I covered Elias as he dragged a crate of ammo from the shed, bullets whizzing past like angry hornets. The plan was simple: hold the line till dark, then slip to the riverbed. But the first backfire hit when their sharpshooter picked off one mare, her blood soaking the sand. We were pinned, the air thick with powder smoke and the metallic tang of fear. My shoulder burned from a graze, but I pushed it down, sighting down the barrel at the leader. He laughed, raising his revolver, and I wondered if Ma's dolls would be all that was left of us by dawn. The doll's porcelain cheek felt colder than the desert night air against my palm as I tucked it into little Elias's cradle. "Sleep now, my sweet boy," I whispered, though my voice cracked like dry earth under boot heels. It had been 3 days since the real Elias stopped breathing, his tiny chest still from the fever that swept through our homestead like a rattler's strike. But this one, this perfect replica with its painted blue eyes and yarn hair the color of his, was breathing life back into the silence, or so I told myself, ignoring the way Ma Whitmore's gaze lingered from across the room, her own doll clutched like a talisman against her breast. I straightened, wiping sweat from my brow, the lantern's flicker casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the adobe walls. Outside, the wind howled through the scrub, carrying the distant yelp of coyotes. Pa had ridden out at dawn for supplies in Tucson, leaving us women to hold the fort, me, my sister-in-law Clara, and Ma. But holding it felt like grasping smoke these days. Clara was in the kitchen, humming a lullaby that twisted my gut, her hands busy stitching clothes for a child that wasn't coming back. We'd buried 3 this year, Elias, then her Tommy, and before that, Ma's own lost ones from back east. The dolls had been her idea, scavenged from a trader's wagon 2 weeks past. "They're not gone," she'd said, eyes fierce. "Not if we don't let 'em." A sharp knock rattled the door, jolting me from my thoughts. Who'd venture out here after dark? I grabbed the rifle from above the mantel, Pa's old Spencer loaded and heavy in my hands, and crept to the window. Peering through the warped glass, I saw a silhouette on horseback, broad-shouldered against the moonlit mesa. Not Pa. This rider was alone, hat pulled low. My heart thudded, memories of Apache raids flickering like embers. "Clara," I hissed, backing toward the kitchen. "Get Ma, someone's here." She appeared in the doorway, flour-dusted apron clutched in white-knuckled fists, her doll peeking from the pocket like a spying imp. "Bandits?" Her voice was a whisper, eyes wide with that cautious fear she'd always carried ever since we fled the Dust Bowl of Kansas. "Stay back." I leveled the rifle at the door, finger hovering on the trigger. The knock came again, insistent, followed by a man's voice, rough as gravel. "Mrs. Whitmore? It's Doc Harlan from town. Your pa sent word. Fever's hit the valley hard. Need to check on the young'uns." Young'uns. The word hung like a noose. I glanced at the cradle, the doll's serene face mocking me. Ma shuffled in then, her silver-streaked hair loose, cradling her own bundle. A doll dressed in the faded frock of her long-dead daughter. "Let him in, Eliza," she said, voice steady but edged with something brittle. "Can't hide from the world forever." I unbarred the door, swinging it open just enough to squint into the night. The doc was middle-aged, dust-caked coat and a black bag slung over his saddle horn. His eyes, sharp under the brim of his hat, scanned the dim interior before settling on me. "Evening, ma'am. Mind if I step in? Been a long ride." Against my better judgment, I nodded, stepping aside. He dismounted, tying his horse to the post, and entered with a nod that didn't reach his eyes. The air thickened as he hung his hat, his gaze sweeping the room, pausing on the cradle, then Clara's doll half hidden in her lap as she hovered by the hearth. Ma sat composed in her rocker, rocking her doll gently, but I saw the tremor in her hands. "Pa said the fever took more?" Harlan asked, setting his bag on the table with a thud. He pulled out a stethoscope, the metal glinting coldly. I swallowed, throat dry. "All of 'em. Buried the last one yesterday." Lies came easier now, a shield against pity or questions. But Clara fidgeted, her witty tongue silenced for once, fingers twisting the doll's tiny dress. Harlan nodded slowly, unpacking vials and a thermometer. "Tragic. Mind if I see the sick room? Make sure it's not lingering." The sick room. Our bedroom, still reeking of camphor and death. Ma's rocking slowed. "No need, doctor. We're managing." Her tone was final, but Harlan's brow furrowed, stepping closer to the cradle despite my glare. He leaned over it, expression shifting from professional to puzzled. "What's this, then? A new babe?" His hand reached out, but I slapped it away, rifle forgotten in the heat of the moment. "Leave it be!" My voice echoed too loud, startling even me. Inside, my mind raced. How to explain the unblinking eyes, the stillness that wasn't sleep? Clara gasped, clutching her doll tighter, while Ma rose, placing herself between us like a sentinel. Harlan straightened, hands raised. "Easy, ma'am. Just trying to help." But suspicion etched his face now, and as he glanced at the three of us, each with our secrets in arm, I knew we'd invited trouble through that door. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters, and for the first time, I wondered if the dolls were keeping the children close, or pulling something darker into our home. The sun hung low over the mesa, turning the scrubland into a furnace of red rock and shadow, and I spurred my horse harder than I meant to, the reins slick in my calloused palms. Elias rode point, his silhouette cutting sharp against the horizon, but he glanced back at me with that steady gaze, the one that said he knew I was pushing too far. "Whitmore," he called, voice rough over the wind. "You see that dust trail? Riders maybe 3 miles out." My gut twisted. Not fear exactly, but the weight of what we'd left behind at the ranch. Ma's dolls, those porcelain-eyed things she'd stitched clothes for after the fever took the boys, stared up from my mind like accusations. We'd burned the house to cover it, but the smoke still clung to my shirt. I reined in beside him, wiping sweat from my brow, the horse's flanks heaving under me. Elias was the cautious one. Always had been since we were kids dodging Apaches in these hills, his dark eyes scanning the terrain like it owed him answers. "Could be bounty hunters," I muttered, my voice cracking dry. "Or worse, folks from town who heard the stories." The Whitmores weren't spoken of kindly anymore, not after Ma started whispering to those dolls at night, calling them by the boys' names, her hands trembling as she brushed their china hair. I had tried to stop her, but he'd ended up in the ground too, fever or no. Now it was just us, me, Elias, and Aunt Clara, who'd shown up last spring with her own secrets and a trunk full of lace. Clara caught up then, her mare lathered and wild-eyed, her face pale under the wide brim of her hat. She was the witty one, quick with a quip to cut the tension, but today her lips pressed thin. "If it's hunters, they'll be after the reward on ghost stories," she said, pulling a flask from her saddlebag and taking a swig. "Mother's gone mad with dolls. Sounds like a dime novel, doesn't it? But we know better." She passed it to me, and I drank deep, the whiskey burning away the dust in my throat. We'd fled at dawn after I found Ma's journal hidden under the floorboards, pages of sketches, dolls with the boys' faces painted on, and notes about bringing them back through some old ritual she'd learned from a traveling preacher. It wasn't madness. It was something darker, stirring in the Arizona heat. We pushed on, the dust trail growing thicker, a serpent uncoiling across the valley. Elias pointed to a narrow arroyo ahead, its walls cracked like old bones. "We can lose them there," he said, decisive, spurring ahead without waiting. I followed, heart pounding against my ribs, Clara's horse close behind. The arroyo swallowed us whole, shadows cooling the air as rocks clattered under hooves. But as we rounded a bend, the plan shattered. 3 riders blocked the exit, bandanas over their faces, rifles glinting in the dying light. Not hunters. These were locals. Men from the mining camp, their leader a burly sort with a scar twisting his cheek. "Whitmore's," he growled, leveling his gun at Elias. "Heard you torched your place. Folks say your ma's raising the dead with those abominations." I dismounted slow, hands raised, my mind racing through the lies we'd rehearsed. Clara slid off her horse too, her voice steady as she stepped forward. "Just a fire, nothing more. Bad wiring in the barn." But the scarred man laughed, cold and mean, gesturing to his men. "We saw the smoke. And we found one of your ma's dolls out there dressed like a boy, eyes following a man like it had a soul." My blood ran cold. We'd buried them all, but one must have surfaced in the chaos. Elias shifted beside me, his hand inching toward his holster. Brave fool that he was. The standoff stretched, wind whistling through the arroyo like a warning. I met the leader's eyes, searching for a way out. Talk, fight, or run. "She's gone," I said finally, voice low. "Fever took her too. We're just heading to Tucson, starting over." It was half true. Ma had vanished into the night before we lit the match, muttering about finishing what the preacher started. The man lowered his rifle a fraction, suspicion etching his face, but his companions flanked us, cutting off retreat. Clara caught my eye, her wits sparking in a whisper only I heard. "Stall him. I've got an idea with the dynamite from the packs." Tension coiled tighter as the leader stepped closer, his boot kicking up dust. "Show us your packs then. If there's no dolls, no harm." Elias tensed, ready to draw, but I nodded, buying time. The arroyo walls loomed, pressing in, and I wondered if Ma's rituals had cursed us all, or if this was just the desert's way of claiming its own. The wind howled through the canyon like a banshee, whipping dust into my eyes as I clutched the rifle tighter. Pa had said we'd make it to the river by noon, but that was before the storm hit, turning the trail into a river of mud that sucked at our wagon wheels. I glanced back at Ma, her face pale under the brim of her bonnet, one hand steadying the bundle in her lap, the doll with Eliza's blue glass eyes stitched into a calico dress that matched my sister's last one. "Keep moving, Caleb," she murmured, voice steady despite the fear I knew was gnawing at her. The other Ma, Aunt Lydia, rode beside us on the mule, her own doll tucked into her saddlebag like a secret shame. We'd buried 3 children between us this year. Fever took them fast in the heat, and these porcelain ghosts were all we had left to hold. I spurred the horses harder, but the lead one faltered, a sharp whinny cutting through the gale as its hoof sank deep into a hidden washout. The wagon lurched, tilting dangerously, and I jumped down, boots sinking ankle-deep in the muck. "Whoa, easy now," my heart pounded. If we lost the wagon, we'd lose everything. The last of the seed corn, the tools, the very dolls that kept the grief from swallowing us whole. Pa was back in Tucson, sick himself, trusting me to get the women folk to safety at the fort. At 14, I felt the weight of it like a millstone. Aunt Lydia dismounted, her skirts hiked up as she grabbed a rope from the saddle. "Tie it to the mule, boy. We'll pull together." Her voice had that edge, the one she used when arguing with Ma over scripture, cautious but unyielding, like she was bracing for divine judgment. We looped the line around the axle, and she clucked to the mule while I heaved from the front. Muscles burned. Rain pelted my back like nails. For a moment it seemed to work. The wheel inched free. But then a crack split the air, not thunder but the axle splintering under the strain. The wagon groaned and listed further, spilling crates into the torrent. Ma cried out, lunging for the doll as it tumbled toward the edge. I dove after her, grabbing her arm just as the mud gave way beneath us. We slid, a tangle of limbs and sodden fabric, stopping only when my fingers dug into a scrub oak's roots. Below, the canyon dropped sheer, a foaming ribbon of floodwater roaring 100 feet down. Aunt Lydia's shouts faded in the wind as she secured the mule. "Caleb, hold on!" I looked up at Ma, her face inches from mine, eyes wide with that same terror I'd seen when Eliza stopped breathing. The doll lay between us. One arm snapped off in the fall, its painted smile cracked like a lie. "We can't lose her again." Ma whispered, reaching for it even as the root shifted under my grip. Grit filled my mouth, human stubbornness, Pa called it, the kind that built empires from dust. But here, in this godforsaken storm, it felt like just another way to drown. I nodded, forcing a grin through chattering teeth. We won't, Ma. Not today. With a surge, I pulled us both up inch by filthy inch, the broken doll clutched between us like a talisman against the dark. I gripped the shotgun tighter, the barrel still warm from the shot that had scattered the coyotes like shadows at dawn. Dust hung in the air over the Whitmore ranch, thick as regret, and Elias coughed beside me, his wiry frame bent against the wind whipping down from the mesas. They're getting bolder, he muttered, wiping blood from a gash on his forearm where one beast had grazed him. My heart pounded not from the animals but from what I'd glimpsed in their wake. A doll, half buried in the dirt near the corral, its porcelain face cracked and staring up like an accusation. Ma had placed it there last night, I knew. After another fever dream woke her screaming about little Tommy. Elias shot me a look, his eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. The cautious one in our ragged trio, me, him, and Aunt Clara, who wasn't blood but might as well be after the diphtheria, took the rest. We can't keep shooting at ghosts, he said, voice low, like saying it louder would summon worse. I nodded, but inside doubt clawed at me. The dolls weren't just Ma's fancy. They'd started showing up in places they shouldn't, moved by hands that weren't ours. We trudged back to the house, the Arizona sun already baking the ground into a skillet. Clara met us at the door, her apron dusted with flour from the biscuits she'd forced down our throats earlier, her wit a shield as brittle as the china she collected. Well, if it ain't the coyote slayers, she quipped, but her smile faltered when she saw Elias's arm. She grabbed a rag and whiskey without a word, dabbing at the wound while I scanned the porch. Another doll sat there, propped against the rocker, this one with Tommy's button eyes sewn on crooked. Who had done that? Ma was inside, humming a lullaby to empty air. The plan had been simple that morning. Ride out to the old mine shaft where the water table dipped, dig for a new spring before the creek ran dry for good. Resource shortage had been gnawing at us since spring, the land turning traitor under the relentless heat, cattle dropping like flies. But now, with Elias hurt and the dolls multiplying like bad omens, doubt seeped in. We push on, I said, more to convince myself. Clara tied off the bandage, her hand steady despite the tremor I knew hid inside. Or we stay and face what's creeping in the walls, she countered, glancing at the doll. Elias straightened, wincing. No. We need that water, or dolls won't be our worry. Grit laced his words, the kind born from burying siblings too young. We loaded the mule with picks and canteens, but as we stepped off the porch, a shadow flickered at the edge of the yard. Not coyote, not wind. I froze, shotgun rising, but it vanished into the scrub. Clara whispered, "It's the grief talking, boy. But if it's more..." She trailed off, grabbing a doll from the porch and tucking it into her pocket like a talisman. The trail to the mine wound narrow, thorns snagging at our boots, the air shimmering with heat that blurred the horizon. Halfway up, the mule balked, ears flat, and Elias cursed as we coaxed it forward. That's when the rock slide hit. Not natural, I swore later, but triggered by something deliberate. Boulders tumbled, one clipping the mule's flank, sending it rearing. I dove, pulling Clara clear as dust exploded around us. Elias shouted, pinned under a chunk of granite, his leg twisted at a wrong angle. Pain etched his face as we levered him free, the bone grinding like gravel. Go on, he gasped, sweat beading on his brow. Without water, we're done. But Clara knelt, tearing her petticoat for a splint, her voice fierce. Not leaving you to the buzzards. I scanned the ridge above, heart hammering. Footprints in the loose soil, too human, leading away. Not animals, not wind. Someone or something watching our desperation. We dragged Elias to shade under a juniper. The canteen passed in silence, water tasting like defeat. The dolls back home felt like a curse now. Ma's way of clinging to ghosts, but here, in the raw bite of the desert, it was our fight that mattered. Clara's eyes met mine, determination hardening her features. We adapt, she said simply. Dig here shallow. Save him first. I nodded, picking up the shovel, the urgent rhythm of earth yielding under blade the only sound as the sun climbed higher, stakes sharpening with every strike. The doll's porcelain eyes stared up at me from the dust-choked floorboards, unblinking even as the wind howled through the cracked window like a banshee let loose. I knelt there in the dim light of the lantern, my knees aching against the rough wood, and reached out a trembling hand. It wasn't little Mary's doll, not exactly. The dress was the same faded calico stitched with the same uneven threads I'd sewn on a rainy afternoon back in Ohio. But the face? God, the face was wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. Like it had been carved by hands that never knew a child's laughter or tears. "Ma?" Tommy's voice cracked from the doorway, small and sharp, pulling me back. He was 12 now, all gangly limbs and wide eyes, clutching the shotgun his pa had given him just last week. "You find something?" I snatched the doll up, tucking it into my apron pocket before he could see. "Nothing but old junk, son. Come help me with these crates." My voice came out steadier than I felt, but inside my thoughts churned like the sandstorm outside. We'd come to this godforsaken ranch in Arizona territory, thinking the dry air would heal us, would fill the hole Mary left when the fever took her 2 winters past. Tom had promised a fresh start, but every creak in this house whispered her name, and now this. Dolls popping up like ghosts in the walls. Tommy shuffled in, his boots scuffing the floor, and started prying at a loose board near the hearth. We'd been searching since dawn, ever since I found the first one under my bed. A tiny arm, porcelain fingers curled as if reaching for something lost. Tom was out riding the fence line, checking for coyotes or worse. Rumors from town spoke of Apache raids, though the sheriff swore it was just drifters. But I knew better. This wasn't raiders. This was something older, tied to the land, to the Whitmores who'd homesteaded here before us. A splintering crack echoed as Tommy yanked the board free, revealing a hollow space beneath. Dust billowed out, and with it a faint sweet scent like lavender and decay. I leaned in, heart pounding, and saw them. 3 dolls nestled together, their heads tilted in eerie unison, dresses yellowed with age. One had hair like Mary's, golden curls matted with what looked like dried blood. "Ma, look." Tommy's excitement turned to fear as he pointed deeper into the crawlspace. There, scratched into the dirt, was a name, Eliza Whitmore. My name, but I hadn't written it. My mind reeled. Had someone been here before us? Or was this house playing tricks, remembering the woman who'd lived here a generation ago? The one the old-timers called the doll mother, after her babies died one by one in the harsh sun. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "We tell your pa when he gets home. No more poking around." But even as I said it, the doll in my pocket seemed to shift, a faint warmth against my thigh. Tommy nodded, pale-faced, and we sealed the board back down, but the damage was done. That night, as thunder rolled over the mesa, I lay awake listening to the wind carry whispers, soft, childlike giggles that sounded too much like Mary's. Tom returned at dusk, his face etched with lines deeper than the arroyos outside. "Fence is down again," he grumbled, hanging his hat by the door. "Something tore it clean through. Ain't no animal I know does that." He was a sturdy man. Tom Whitmore, with calloused hands and a quiet faith that had carried us west. But tonight his eyes darted to the shadows like a cornered fox. I waited until Tommy was asleep before showing him the doll from my pocket. His jaw tightened as he turned it over, the lantern light catching the unnatural sheen on its cheeks. "Where'd you get this?" "Under the floor," I whispered, glancing at the crawl space. "And there's more, Tom, with my name carved like a grave marker." He set the doll down hard, the clink echoing like a warning. "Folks in town say the last Eliza, my great-aunt, she lost 4 young'uns to the pox. Started making dolls to replace 'em. Kept 'em in the house, talked to 'em like they was real. Husband found her one morning, rocking a bundle of rags in the nursery, singing lullabies to nothing. A chill snaked down my spine, colder than the desert night. You think that's what's happening here? The house. Rememberin'. Tom rubbed his beard, staring at the doll. I think we burn 'em all. Tomorrow we dig up every corner. His plan was simple, born of that farmer's grit he'd inherited from his pa. Fire cleanses, he'd say, like the Bible promises. But as he doused the lantern, I couldn't shake the feeling that those porcelain eyes watched us from the dark, waiting for us to make our mistake. Dawn broke bloody over the horizon, painting the ranch in reds that seeped into the soil like old wounds. We started in the attic, Tommy hauling down trunks while Tom swung a pry bar at locked cabinets. The air grew thick with dust and that cloying lavender, and soon enough we uncovered a nest. A dozen dolls, some cracked and limbless, others pristine as the day they were made. One even wore a locket I'd lost years ago, engraved with Mary's initials. "Stack 'em in the yard," Tom ordered, his voice gruff to mask the tremor. I gripped the shotgun tighter, the barrel still warm from the blast that had scattered the coyotes at the edge of the arroyo. Dust swirled in the late afternoon sun, clinging to my sweat-soaked shirt like a second skin. Ma Whitmore's voice cut through the haze, sharp as a switchblade. "Elias, you see that? One of 'em weren't no coyote." I wiped my eyes and peered into the settling grit. There, half buried in the red earth, lay a doll, porcelain face cracked, one glass eye staring blankly at the sky. Its calico dress was torn, stuffed limbs splayed like a broken bird. Not just any doll, one of hers, Ma's special ones, the kind she whispered to at night when she thought we were asleep. "Damn it all," I muttered, slinging the gun over my shoulder and scrambling down the bank. The arroyo was a jagged scar through the ranch land, carved deeper each monsoon, swallowing fences and dreams alike. We'd lost 2 calves to it last spring, and now this, a sign that whatever madness gripped the house was spilling out. Pa had always said the desert played tricks, but he'd been gone 3 years now, carried off by fever after the raid, left Ma with the boys and me, and those dolls that started appearing after the little ones died. Twins born too soon buried under the cottonwood. At first it was just sketches in her journal, then the sewing, then the faces. Pale, unblinking, replacing the cribs that stayed empty. I knelt beside the doll, its tiny hand curled as if reaching for something lost. The coyotes must have dragged it from the cellar. The trapdoor was ajar again this morning, hinges creaking like old bones. "Elias." Ma called from above, her silhouette framed against the ridge. She descended carefully, skirts hitched, her face gaunt under the wide-brim hat. Brave as ever Ma was, but cautious too, always weighing the cost before a step. "What in God's name dragged it out here?" she said, voice low, eyes darting to the horizon where thunderheads gathered like uninvited kin. I didn't answer right away. Picked it up instead, feeling the unnatural weight in its belly. Sawdust mixed with something heavier like river stones. The wind, maybe. Or them scavengers, but it ain't staying out here for the buzzards. She snatched it from me, cradling it against her chest. "This one's Eliza, you remember? The one with the blue ribbon." Her fingers trembled, tracing the crack on the cheek. Witty Ma used to be, quick with a joke to lighten the supper table, but grief had carved her humor into something brittle. We climbed back up, the doll tucked under her arm like a sleeping child. The ranch house loomed ahead, adobe walls baked to the color of dried blood, the corral empty save for the 3 horses stamping at flies. My brothers, Tom and little Jed, were out mending the windmill, or so they'd claimed before dawn. Truth was, they avoided the house these days, same as me when I could. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of lye soap and sage. Ma set the doll on the mantel beside its kin, 5 now lined up like sentinels, each with a name etched on a tin tag. Eliza joined them, ribbon retied with care. "We'll fix you up," she murmured, not to me. I poured water from the barrel, splashing my face in the basin. "Ma, we can't keep pretending." The neighbors talk. Old man Hargrove rode by yesterday, staring at the windows like they was haunted. She turned, eyes fierce. "Let him talk. This land's ours, Elias. Whitmore blood in the soil." But her voice cracked on the last word, and she busied herself with the hearth, poking at embers that refused to catch. Dinner was beans and cornbread, silent except for the wind rattling the shutters. Tom and Jed returned as the sky bruised purple, faces streaked with grease. Tom, the cautious one, glanced at the mantel and said nothing. Jed, barely 13 and all bravado, snorted. "Another one? Ma, that's the 3rd this week." "Quiet," she snapped, ladling portions. "They're family." I watched Jed's jaw set the way he pushed food around his plate. We'd argued before. Him wanting to burn them all, me holding back for Ma's sake. But tonight tension coiled tighter, like a rattler in the boot. After, as stars pricked the velvet dark, I slipped out to the barn. The doll from the arroyo nagged at me. Something about its eye, glinting wrong in the light. I lit a lantern and rummaged in the tack room, finding Ma's old sewing kit. Unstitched the seam careful-like, and out tumbled not just stuffing but a locket. Pa's, the one lost in the flood. Inside a curl of hair dark as mine. Heart pounding, I resealed it, but the damage was done. The house wasn't holding secrets anymore. They were clawing their way out. By midnight, thunder rolled closer, promising rain that could flood the arroyo and wash away half the herd. I lay awake, shotgun by the bed, listening to Ma's murmurs from the parlor. The dolls answered in whispers only she heard, and for the first time I wondered if they spoke to me too. The doll's porcelain cheek felt colder than the desert night air against my palm as I lifted it from the cradle. Eliza's eyes, those painted glass orbs, stared up at me, unblinking, like they knew what I'd done. Or what I hadn't. My hands trembled, not from the chill seeping through the cabin's thin walls, but from the weight of it all. Pa was out there somewhere, his horse's hooves long faded into the scrub, chasing shadows of the raid that took the boys. And here I was, playing pretend with Mother's twisted game. I set the doll down gently, its frilled dress pooling like spilled milk on the rough-hewn table. The fire in the hearth popped, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls, making the other cradles look alive. There were 4 of them now, lined up like soldiers in the dim light, each holding a doll that mirrored the children we'd buried under the cottonwood last spring. Mother's doing every stitch and curl. She'd sewn their tiny outfits from the remnants of their clothes, whispering to them as if they could hear. "They'll come back," she'd say, her voice cracking like dry earth. But I knew better. The fever had taken them, not some curse or Apache arrow. Still, in this god-forsaken stretch of Arizona, with the wind howling like lost souls, it was easier to believe her lies than face the emptiness. Footsteps crunched outside, heavy and deliberate. Not Pa's, his were lighter, always cautious after the war. I froze, my breath catching as I reached for the rifle propped by the door. The latch clicked and the door swung open on protesting hinges. It was Caleb, my brother-in-law, his face gaunt under the brim of his hat, dust caked into the lines of his worry. He carried a burlap sack slung over one shoulder, and the metallic tang of blood followed him in. "Anna," he said, voice low, urgent. He dropped the sack by the fire and it thudded softly, something shifting inside. Found this out by the arroyo. Raiders sure as sin. Left it like a warning. I didn't move from the table, my fingers itching toward the doll's lace collar. "What is it?" He untied the sack with hands that shook worse than mine, pulling back the cloth to reveal a bundle wrapped in oilskin, small, no bigger than a loaf of bread. My stomach twisted as he unwrapped it. Another doll, but this one was different, crude, carved from mesquite wood, its joints rough-hewn and stained dark. No pretty dress, just rags tied around its middle, and eyes painted with what looked like dried blood. A note pinned to its chest scrawled in charcoal, "Yours ain't the only ghosts." The air thickened, the fire's warmth turning stifling. I thought of Mother's ravings last night, how she'd clutched her own doll, little Tommy's replacement, and sworn she heard him crying from the yard. I'd dismissed it as grief, the kind that twists a body inside out. But now, with Caleb's find staring up at us, doubt wormed in. Were the raiders mocking us? Or worse, joining in? "We burn it," I said finally, snatching the bundle before Caleb could protest. The wood felt unnaturally warm, like it held a fever of its own. I thrust it into the flames, watching the rags catch first, then the wood blacken and curl. But as it burned, a faint whine rose, not from the fire, but from the cradles behind me. Eliza's doll tipped sideways in its bed, rolling until its head lolled toward the blaze, those glass eyes reflecting the inferno like tiny hells. Caleb crossed to the window, peering into the blackness. "Pa's not back yet, and the wind's carrying voices tonight. Real ones, Anna, not just the dust devils." I nodded, the rifle now heavy in my grip. Mother's room was silent at the far end of the cabin, but I could picture her there, rocking with her doll, whispering secrets to the dead. We'd have to tell her about this, about the warning. But part of me wondered if she already knew, if she'd invited it somehow with her desperate stitches and pleas. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like bony fingers. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be dolls waiting in the cradles. It would be blood, real and warm, spilling over the thresholds we'd tried so hard to guard. The doll's porcelain eyes gleamed under the lantern's flicker, unblinking as it perched on the edge of the windowsill, its tiny hands clutching the lace curtain like a sentinel. I froze in the doorway of the old adobe, my rifle half raised, the weight of it suddenly too heavy in my sweat-slicked palms. Ma had sworn the things were just comforts, empty shells to fill the silence left by Elias and little Sarah. But this one, the one she'd dressed in Sarah's faded blue frock, tilted its head, just a fraction, as if listening to the wind howling through the canyon outside. "Tom, get back," whispered Aunt Clara from behind me, her voice a ragged thread in the thick air of the room. She clutched her own doll to her chest, the one meant for her lost boy, Tommy. Its china face cracked from some forgotten fall. Her eyes darted, wild and feverish. The same look she'd had since the fever took them all those months ago. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to think she was the sane one left in this god-forsaken house, but the way her fingers trembled on that doll's yarn hair told me otherwise. I stepped forward anyway, boots scraping the packed dirt floor, my heart pounding like a stampede in my ears. The air smelled of dust and sage mixed with something sweeter, like rotting petals from the wildflowers we'd buried the kids under. "It's nothing," I muttered, more to myself than her, forcing my legs to move. But as I reached for the doll, its mouth cracked open in a silent yawn, revealing rows of needle teeth that hadn't been there yesterday. I jerked back, the rifle clattering against the wall, and Clara let out a sharp gasp. Outside, the coyotes started up again, their yips closer now, echoing off the red rock walls that hemmed in our ranch like a grave. We'd come to Arizona chasing gold and freedom after Pa's death back east, but this land had taken more than it gave. First the drought, then the sickness that swept through like a biblical plague. Ma and Aunt Clara, sisters bound by blood and now by madness, had turned to those cursed dolls after the burying. At first it was whispers, rocking them in the empty cradles. Then the talking late at night, as if the children answered back. I lunged for the doll again, this time grabbing it by the arm. Its body was cold, unnaturally so, like river ice in July, but it twisted in my grip, the joint popping with a sound like breaking bone. "Damn you," I growled, hurling it to the floor. It landed with a thud, limbs splayed, but then, God help me. It began to crawl, slow and deliberate, toward Clara's feet. She screamed, dropping her own doll, which rolled under the table and began to giggle, a high, tinkling sound that pierced the night. We bolted for the door, Clara's hand in mine, her nails digging crescents into my skin. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, shadows lengthening from the corners where more dolls sat in silent vigil. Elias's with its stitched grin, Tommy's with eyes sewn shut but somehow seeing. The front door stuck, warped from the heat, and I rammed my shoulder against it, wood splintering under the force. We spilled out into the moonlit yard, the Arizona sky vast and indifferent above us, stars sharp as knife points. But they followed. From the open door, a chorus of tiny footsteps pattered like rain on tin, dolls tumbling out in a grotesque parade, their dresses trailing dust. Clara tripped over a root, falling hard, and I hauled her up, my mind racing for a plan. The barn. The dynamite we'd stashed for blasting rock in the mine shaft. If fire couldn't touch them, maybe explosion would. "Run!" I shouted, dragging her toward the sagging structure, the dolls gaining ground with unnatural speed, their laughter weaving through the wind like a dirge. Inside the barn, the air was thick with hay and oil, the crate of explosives hidden under a tarp. My hand shook as I pried it open, the red sticks glowing faintly in the dark. Clara sobbed behind me, clutching a pitchfork like a talisman. "They're coming for us, Tom. Our babies. They want their places back." I lit the fuse with a match, the sulfur sting biting my nose, and shoved the bundle toward the door just as the first doll breached the threshold, its face smeared with what looked like grave dirt. We dove behind a stack of barrels, the world erupting in a roar that shook the earth, flames licking the night sky. Dust rained down, and for a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. When we crawled out, the yard was a crater of scorched earth, doll parts scattered like broken promises, limbs charred, faces melted into grotesque masks. But in the cabin's doorway, untouched amid the rubble, sat one last doll, Ma's favorite, the one she'd whispered secrets to. Its eyes met mine, and it smiled, waving a tiny hand as if to say, "Not yet." The lantern's flame flickered low as I crept. Through the shadowed parlor, the air thick with the scent of dust and something sweeter, like wilted roses. My boot caught on a loose floorboard, sending a creak echoing too loud in the silence, and I froze, heart pounding against my ribs. Pa had always said the Whitmore's old ranch house held ghosts, but tonight, with the wind howling outside like a pack of coyotes, I wondered if he'd been right all along. I'd come for answers about my sister Eliza, who vanished here 2 summers back. But the dolls staring from the shelves, porcelain faces cracked and eyeless, made me question if I'd find her or something worse. I pressed on, rifle slung over my shoulder, the weight a small comfort against the chill seeping through the walls. The family was gone, or so the townsfolk whispered. Ma Whitmore and her daughters all struck down by fever or misfortune, leaving behind this mausoleum of lace and lies. But as I rounded the corner into the hallway, a soft thump came from upstairs. Not the house settling, but deliberate like a footfall. My mind raced. Bandits? Or had someone else come sniffing around these secrets? I gripped the banister, the wood splintering under my calloused fingers, and started up, each step a whisper of protest. At the landing, the air grew heavier, laced, with that cloying sweetness, and I saw it, a door ajar at the end of the corridor spilling faint yellow light. Dolls lined the walls here too, smaller ones cradled in tiny cradles, their stitched mouths curved in eternal smiles. One had tumbled to the floor, its china head split open, revealing sawdust spilling like innards. I swallowed hard. Memories of Eliza's laughter flashing unbidden, her braiding corn husks into dolls for the younger ones. Innocent games turned nightmare in this place. Whatever had taken her, it wasn't fever. The sheriff's report mentioned unaccountable substitutions, words that meant nothing until now. Pushing the door open, I stepped into what must have been the nursery, the room alive with shadows dancing from a single candle on the mantel. There in the center sat a figure on the edge of a rocking chair. Not a doll, but a woman, her back to me, humming a lullaby I half remembered from my own childhood. Her hair, gray-streaked and tangled, fell like a shroud, and beside her on the floor lay a bundle wrapped in faded calico, unmoving. "Who's there?" she rasped, not turning, her voice cracked like dry earth. I leveled the rifle, but my hands shook. This couldn't be Ma Whitmore. The stories said she was long dead. "I'm looking for Eliza Kane," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "She came here working as a maid. What happened to her?" The woman chuckled, low and mirthless, rocking forward to reveal a face etched with lines deeper than the Arizona canyons. Her eyes, milky but sharp, fixed on me. "Eliza? Oh, child, she's right here. We all are." She lifted the bundle, unwrapping it with reverent hands, and my stomach twisted. Not a child, but another doll, life-sized, with yarn hair the color of Eliza's auburn locks, dressed in her favorite blue gingham. The face was painted, crude but careful, freckles dotting cheeks that never flushed, eyes glass and vacant. "Fever took my babies," the woman murmured, stroking the doll's head. "One by one, but I couldn't bear the empty cradles. So we made them new skins, new breaths. Your sister, she understood, helped sew the last one before she joined us." "Joined? Them?" The words hung like smoke, and I backed a step, rifle forgotten as realization clawed up my throat. The thump earlier. It wasn't footsteps, but the rocking chair, or something heavier shifting in the walls. Whispers from town echoed. Daughters not buried proper, dolls buried instead, and the mothers lingering, mad with grief. But Eliza? My brave, quick-witted sister, who'd laughed off superstitions, no. "You're lying," I growled, advancing. "Show me where she is, or—" The woman rose then, swift as a rattler, and from the shadows behind her, two more figures emerged, slender, doll-like in their stillness, faces pale under lace bonnets. Her, daughters or what remained, eyes unblinking, movements jerky like marionettes. One held a needle and thread, the other a bundle of cloth that looked too much like skin. "Join us," the eldest whispered, her voice a hollow echo. "The desert takes all eventually. We just replace what's lost." Panic surged, hot and blinding. I fired once, the shot shattering a mirror above the mantel, glass raining like judgment. The women didn't flinch, only tilted their heads in unison, a chorus of creaking joints. I bolted for the door, their footsteps, soft, padding, unnatural, trailing me down the stairs. The parlor dolls seemed to watch, turning their heads as I passed, and outside the wind screamed louder, carrying faint cries that might have been Eliza's name. I burst into the night, rifle barking again to cover my retreat. But as I sprinted, toward my horse tethered by the corral, a stitch of doubt pulled tight in my chest. What if she was still in there, trapped in their madness? The doll's face haunted me, so like hers, and in the moon's harsh light, I wondered if ingenuity or grit could unravel this, or if the desert's secrets would claim me too, leaving another, empty cradle behind. The sun hung low over the parched earth, casting long shadows that clawed at the Whitmore ranch like fingers from the grave. I gripped the rifle tighter, my knuckles white against the worn stock as Eliza's voice cut through the still air from the doorway of the old bunkhouse. "They're not coming back, Marshall. You can't make 'em." Her eyes, hollowed by years of loss, Flicked toward the dolls lined up on the porch, those porcelain faces staring blankly, dressed in the faded calico of children long buried. I swallowed the dust in my throat and stepped forward, boots crunching on the gravel. The air smelled of sage and something sweeter, like wilted flowers left too long in the heat. This ends tonight, Eliza. Your husband saw what I saw last night. Those things moving when the moon hit 'em just right. Ain't no grief making that happen. Behind her, young Tommy, barely 14, the only living Whitmore left with fire in his veins, shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. He'd been the one to fetch me from town, whispering about shadows that whispered back, but now doubt clouded his face. Loyalty pulling him toward his ma like a tether. She laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the adobe walls. Grief, that's all it is, you city fool. The fever took my babies one by one, and these... She gestured to the dolls, their glass eyes catching the dying light. These keep 'em close, warmer than the ground they're rotten in. But her hand trembled as she smoothed the lace on the smallest one's dress, and I caught the flicker, a subtle twitch from the figure beside it, like a puppet straining against invisible strings. Tommy broke the silence, his voice cracking. Ma, he ain't lying. I saw it too. Last night when the wind picked up Sarah's doll, it turned its head, looked right at me. He took a step back, eyes wide, the brave boy who'd ridden through the night now fraying at the edges. I nodded to him, grateful for the crack in the wall they'd built around their madness. We burn 'em, Eliza, all of 'em, or whatever's riding inside comes for the rest of us next. She lunged then, faster than grief should allow, snatching up the largest doll, little Jacob's, with its painted smile cracked like old earth. You touch them and I'll bury you with them. The thing in her arms jerked, a porcelain arm flailing out, and Tommy yelped, stumbling back into the dirt. I raised the rifle, heart pounding against my ribs, but hesitated. Couldn't shoot a woman, not even one lost to this desert curse. The doll's head lolled unnaturally, mouth gaping in a silent scream, and for a heartbeat I swore I heard a child's wail on the wind. We circled each other in the yard, the tension coiling like a rattler in the brush. Eliza clutched the doll to her chest, rocking it as if soothing a nightmare, but her whispers turned frantic, words tumbling out in a language I didn't recognize, old Apache chants mixed with English pleas. Tommy edged toward me, his caution giving way to the grit I'd seen in him on the ride back. Marshal the fire, like you said, in the pit out back. I nodded sharply, never taking my eyes off her. Go, I'll hold her. As he darted off, Eliza's face twisted, tears carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks. They were mine, my light in this godforsaken waste. You think burning keepsakes fixes the empty? The doll in her arms went still, but another on the porch stirred, its tiny feet scraping against the wood as if testing the ground. I backed toward the bunkhouse door, rifle steady now, mind racing through the tales the old prospectors told, spirits latching onto the desperate, twisting love into something hungry. Tommy returned hauling armfuls of dry mesquite, sweat beading on his brow despite the cooling evening. He dumped it into the fire pit, the branches crackling to life under his frantic strikes of flint. Hurry, Ma! It's not them anymore. But Eliza was beyond hearing, advancing with the doll outstretched like an offering or a weapon. I fired a warning shot into the air, the boom shattering the quiet, and she froze, the doll slipping from her grasp to shatter on the stones. Shards flew, and from the broken pieces a thin mist rose, coiling toward the darkening sky. She collapsed to her knees amid the fragments, sobbing now, the fight draining out like blood from a wound. Tommy dropped the torch into the pit, flames roaring up, and together we gathered the dolls from the porch, each one heavier than it should be, resisting our pull as if alive. One by one they fed the fire, the porcelain popping like gunfire, releasing wisps of smoke that carried faint, echoing cries. Eliza watched, unresisting, her hands raw from clutching the remnants. By the time the last doll curled black in the embers, the night had fully claimed the ranch, stars pricking the vast Arizona sky. Tommy knelt beside his mother, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, his voice steady for the first time. It's over, Ma. We can start clean. She leaned into him, whispering apologies to the flames, but I saw the shadow in her eyes, the cost etched deep, a hollow that no ingenuity or grit could fully mend. The spirits were gone, but the Whitmores, they'd carry the weight forever. A family forged in fire and loss. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and turned toward my horse. The doll's porcelain eyes stared up at me from the dust-choked floor of the old Whitmore cabin, unblinking even as the coyotes howled closer outside. I gripped the shotgun tighter, my knuckles white against the worn walnut stock, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. Ma had insisted we burn them all, every last one of those cursed things. But here I was, alone in the dim flicker of the lantern, facing the one that wouldn't stay shattered. Elias, I whispered to myself, tasting the copper tang of fear on my tongue. You ain't losing your nerve now. The air hung heavy with the scent of sagebrush and something sweeter, like overripe fruit seeping from the cracks in the walls. I'd smashed the others hours ago after Pa's warning rode in on the stage from Tucson. The dolls weren't just replacements. They were thieves, stealing breaths from the living to feed the dead one's ghosts. But this one, the one with Sarah's stitched-on curls, had rolled under the bed like it had a mind of its own. I kicked it hard, boot connecting with that cold, unyielding face. It skittered across the floorboards, coming to rest against the door just as the first scrabble of claws echoed from the porch. Not coyotes, something worse drawn by the family's old sin. Ma's sin mostly after the fever took the little ones in '72. She'd sewn those ragtag effigies from their clothes, whispering lullabies to the empty eyes, convinced it would bring them back. Pa had turned a blind eye until the whispers started, until neighbors vanished on moonless nights. The door rattled, wood groaning under an unseen weight. I pumped the shotgun, the metallic click sharp in the silence. Come on then, I muttered, aiming at the gap where moonlight sliced through. But the doll twitched first, its tiny hand curling like a spider's leg. I froze, sweat trickling down my spine. It couldn't move. Dolls didn't move. Yet there it was, inching toward me, the porcelain cracking further with each scrape, revealing something dark and writhing beneath. Memories flooded in unbidden, Ma rocking that thing in the rocker last winter, humming Shenandoah while her eyes glazed over, empty as the dolls. I'd begged her to stop, told her it was madness after the preacher's visit, but she'd clutched it closer, whispering, "She's back, Elias, feel her heart." Pa had nodded along, his once strong hands trembling as he nailed the window shut. Now they were both gone, Ma to the desert fever again, Pa to whatever hunted us, and it was just me, the last Whitmore, holding the line. The door splintered inward with a crack like thunder, and shapes poured through. Twisted forms, half shadow, half child, their faces stitched with burlap and bone. Sarah's ghost led them, or what was left, eyes like black pits, mouth sewn in a perpetual smile. They didn't rush. They glided, fingers outstretched, murmuring in voices too small for the night. I fired. The buckshot tore through the nearest one, shredding fabric and ectoplasm in a spray that sizzled on the floor. It wailed, high and piercing, but the others pressed on. The doll at my feet laughed, a tinkling, mechanical sound, and latched onto my ankle. Porcelain fingers digging in like iron. Pain lanced up my leg, cold fire spreading, and I swear I felt Sarah's tiny hand in mine, pulling me down into the dark. No, I wouldn't go like that. Gritting my teeth, I stomped down, grinding the doll's head to powder under my heel. Shards flew and the grip loosened, but the ghosts were upon me now, their touches like ice needles. I swung the empty shotgun like a club, cracking skulls that reformed in wisps of smoke. One latched to my arm, whispering my name. Elias, Elias, come play. And for a heartbeat I saw her. My sister, real as the day she died, beckoning from the shadows. But it was a lie, all of it. Ma's lie, the doll's lie. I roared, shoving past them toward the hearth where the embers still glowed. The family Bible lay there, pages yellowed, and beside it, the silver locket Pa had given Ma on their wedding day, engraved with a cross, the only holy thing left in this God-forsaken place. I snatched it, slamming it open against the lead ghost's chest. Light flared, unnatural and blinding, searing the air with the smell of brimstone. The whispers turned to shrieks. They recoiled, forms unraveling like smoke and wind, but not before one clawed deep into my shoulder, drawing blood that burned like acid. Sarah's shape lingered longest, her stitched smile twisting in what might have been sorrow. Why, it mouthed, silent now. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, the cabin suddenly empty save for the wind whistling through the broken door. The doll's remains glittered in the lantern light, inert at last. Dawn crept in, painting the horizon gold, but my arm hung limp, the wound pulsing with a cold that no fire could touch. We'd won this night, but the desert remembered, and as I bandaged myself with strips from Ma's old apron, I knew the Whitmore's debt wasn't paid, not fully. Something lingered in me now, a whisper at the edge of sleep waiting for the next moonless night. The sun dipped low over the mesas, casting long shadows that clawed at the ranch house like accusatory fingers. I gripped the shotgun tighter, its barrel still warm from the shot that had shattered the last of those porcelain faces. Ma Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide but empty, clutching the tattered dress of what she'd called Little Eliza. Though we all knew now it was just rags wrapped around a hollow shell. The air hung heavy with the scent of gunpowder and dust, and my heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. How had it come to this? One moment we'd been piecing together the truth from faded letters and hidden trunks, the next facing down the ghosts she'd built from grief and madness. Pa's voice cut through the silence first, rough as gravel. "Elias, put it down. She ain't the enemy here." He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the splintered wood of the porch, hands raised like he was calming a spooked horse. But I couldn't, not after seeing the row of children in the attic, dolls with real hair, stitched mouths sewn shut to keep their secrets. Ma had buried the real ones years ago. Fever took 'em all in '72, and in her sorrow she'd remade them, replaced them. And somehow in the whispering winds of Arizona nights, those replacements had started whispering back, drawing us into this nightmare. I lowered the gun just a fraction, sweat stinging my eyes. "She tried to make us join him, Pa. Said the dolls needed brothers and sisters to be whole." My voice cracked, remembering how she'd cornered us in the barn, her hands cold as clay as she pressed a carved face against my cheek. Cousin Lila, the cautious one who'd come from Tucson to help with the harvest, had been the first to fight back. Her quick thinking with the lantern oil had bought us time, turning the attic into a bonfire of illusions. But the cost, God, the cost. Lila's arm was burned bad, wrapped in strips from her own petticoat, and the ranch house smoked like a fresh grave. Ma finally moved, her lips trembling as she dropped the dress. It pooled at her feet like spilled blood. "I only wanted to keep them close." Her words were a whisper, earnest in their brokenness, no grand defense, just the raw ache of a woman who'd lost everything to the desert's cruelty. Pa wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the tension eased like a storm cloud cracking open to let in light. We didn't speak of rebuilding that night. Instead, we sat by the dying embers outside, the four of us, Pa, Ma, Lila, and me, sharing a flask of water that tasted like victory and ash. The dolls were gone, reduced to shards that glittered under the stars, but the emptiness lingered, a shadow in Ma's eyes that no ingenuity could fully chase away. I'd always thought our grit would conquer any frontier hardship, but this was the real wild, the kind that hollowed you from the inside. As dawn broke, painting the horizon in reluctant gold, I knew we'd adapt, mend what we could. But some replacements could never be undone.